challenges today. We just finished discussing one of the big challenges can be not being aware of the context of the situation. We discussed our three areas of context, which are the purpose, the audience, and the setting. Now we're going to go on to our next communication challenge, which can be when a speaker has little to no attempt or effort put in to try and maintain audience interest and attention through delivery. It's really important to try and make a speech interesting for your audience. Like, we've mentioned this before when we talked about speech anxiety, but like, your audience wants you to succeed. They want to learn from you. They don't want their time to be wasted. And so, similarly, when you go into a speaking situation and you're going to give a speech to somebody, you want to make sure that you're trying to give a good delivery of it because it'll make you more persuasive. It'll make you seem more passionate and more intelligent about your topic. And so, delivery is really important to make sure your audience can really relate with what you're speaking about. So, that is what we are going to be discussing today. We're going to be starting in slide 17 and ending around slide 27. Well, those are for my slides. I don't know if that's for your slides. So sorry if that numbering has been off. That's my bad. So let's start first with, I think, what is some spiritual importance of delivery. We're going to be in 1 Kings 18. And this is when Elijah is, and he is of Baal. And delivery is a different component to the story. So I'm going to read this to y'all, and I want you to kind of take mental notes of like, oh, okay, I think this is why delivery is significant here. So this is 1 Kings 18, 20 through 40. So Ahab sent to all the people of Israel and gathered the prophets together at Mount Carmel. How long will you go limping between two different opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal, then follow him. And the people did not answer him a word. Then Elijah said to the people, I, even I only, am left a prophet of the Lord, but Baal's prophets are 450 men. Let 2 bulls be given to us, and let them choose 1 bull for themselves, and cut it in pieces and lay it on the wood, but put no fire to it. And I will prepare the other bull and lay it on the wood and put no fire to it. And you call upon the name of your God, and I will call upon the name of the Lord. And the God who answers by fire, he is God. And all the people answered, It is well spoken. Then Elijah said to the prophets of Baal, Choose for yourselves 1 bull and prepare it first, for you are many, and call upon the name of your God, but put no fire to it. And they took the bull that was given them, and they prepared it, and called upon the name of Baal from morning until noon, saying, O Baal, answer us! But there was no voice, and no one answered. And they limped around the altar that they had made. And at noon, Elijah mocked them, saying, Cry aloud, for he is a god. Either he is musing, or he's relieving himself, or he's on a journey. After their custom with swords and lances until the blood gushed out upon them. And as midday passed, they raved on until the time of the offering of the oblation, but there was no voice, no one answered, no one paid attention. Then Elijah said to all the people, Come near to me. And all the people came near to him. And he repaired the altar of the Lord that had been thrown down. Elijah took 12 stones, according to the number of the tribes of the sons of Jacob, to whom the word of the Lord came, saying, Israel shall be your name. And with the stones he built an altar in the name of the Lord. And he made a trench about the altar, as great as would contain 2 seahs of seed. And he put the wood in order, and cut the bull in pieces, and laid it on the wood. And he said, Fill 4 jars with water, and pour it on the burnt offering and on the wood. And he said, Do it a second time. And they did it a second time. And he said, Do it a third time. And they did it a third time. And the water ran around the altar, filled the trench also with water. And at the time of the offering of the oblation, Elijah the prophet came near and said, O Lord God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, know today that you are God in Israel, and that I am your servant, and that I have done all these things at your word. Answer me, O Lord, answer me, that this people may know that you, O Lord, are God, and that you have turned their hearts back. Then the fire of the Lord fell and consumed the burnt offering and the wood and the stones and the dust, and licked up the water that was in the trench. And when all the people saw it, they fell on their faces and said, "The Lord, he is God. The Lord, he is God." And Elijah said to them, "Seize the prophets of Baal. Let not one of them escape." And they seized them, and Elijah brought them down to the brook Kishon and slaughtered them there. Now, I know it's a lot. So, there's a few things that I caught that I think are really important components of delivery. Um, so first, I think just like the visual of like the vivid imagery and language that is used in this story is really important for us to take note of. So it says like, "How long will you go limping between two different opinions?" It shows like cowardice and weakness of the people of Israel. Um, it has kind of like a writing thing. We're not discussing much like a way to write delivery into your presentations, but it's just using like really cool imagery in the way you write that invites. You can see I love this tone change here where it says Elijah is mocking them. It's like, oh, maybe your God is going to the bathroom, or maybe your God is on a trip and he's not home, or maybe he's sleeping. Like, God does not go to the bathroom. God does not just go on vacation and forget about his people. God does not take naps. So he's just making fun of them. He's being ruthless. So I think it's a really neat, like the tone change here. It's like, oh man, yeah, like Elijah's making fun of them. Like he's like changing the tone, like, oh, maybe he's asleep, like totally making fun of these people. So that's like a good example of delivery there, as we're going to learn about in a few minutes. If I can go to the next slide, I'll show you what else I noticed. Oops. Um, he also used some really cool visual aids, and we're going to learn about visual aids in this class. Y'all will if you take the college public speaking class when you're seniors. Um, but you'll learn about like hand gestures and stuff like that. And so we can see that Elijah is making everything he does very purposeful, and that's how our elements of delivery should be too. So he's using 12 stones specifically according to the number of the tribes of the son of Jacob. He's making a really big show out of like, hey, this is God, this is not me. Like he makes the trench super big. He pours water all over it. Like I think he says three times. Yeah, three times. So like the altar and the wood and the bull are all just soaked. So he's making a big show out of it. Using definitely tone of voice, hand gestures, those visual aids. And then this is definitely something that like when you read it, like you can't just be like I'm sure when Elijah's saying this, like he is like counting on God to show up in this moment. So he's not going to be like, "Oh Lord God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known this day that you are God in Israel, and that I am your servant, and that I've done all these things at your word. Answer me, O Lord, answer me, that this people may know that you, O Lord, are God, and that you've turned their hearts back." Like, no, that's so no, there's no passion in that at all. There's no interest, there's no tone change. So that is not how he would have read it at all. It's very passionate. It's full of those emotional tone changes. And so that is how we need to be reading too. And you can see like how the story would have been so different if just like Elijah's like, all right, either you follow Baal or you follow God, and that's it. But instead he makes this big show of it. Like, he invites God into this presentation to like let God do the work. So I think it's just really cool to show like how important delivery is, like even to like these prophets, and how like we can use it for this like same kind of power as well in our presentations. Unfortunately, we usually do a really cool delivery project in class whenever we're all actually physically together. And I try to figure out what would be a good way to do this, but I really just can't figure it out. And so I'm just going to teach you all about delivery by lecturing about it. I'm sorry. Usually we do some kind of fun activity, but it's just not going to work out the same. So let's get started. All right. So there are two major elements of delivery we're going to be talking about. First, we're talking about verbal elements of delivery. Excuse me. And then we're going to talk about nonverbal elements of delivery. Y'all have already learned about nonverbal elements of delivery a little bit. We talked about how that means basically it's like body language. So we're going to start first with some verbal elements. Even though we talk every day, all the time, we are not experts of verbal delivery. Even we understand the fundamentals of it, it's still something that takes a lot of practice. So it's important, like we discussed with speech anxiety management, that we practice our speeches and all our communication out loud quite a bit so we can make sure we have that verbal element really nailed down to what we want it to sound like. The two major elements of delivery, verbal elements that we're going to be talking about, are pronunciation and articulation. Having a strong vocabulary when you speak depends on knowing the words, like what they mean, making sure you're using them correctly, but also being able to pronounce them. So, pronunciation is the accepted standard of how a word sounds. I don't know who decides the accepted standard, but y'all definitely know there are several words where it's like, oh, yeah, like this is how you say it. It's not how you say it. GIF versus GIF is a great example. Like when that first became a thing, everyone's like, "Oh, well, how do you say this?" I think the creator of it said like, "Oh, it's GIF," but I think as a society we decided no, it's GIF because like it's a graphic something interface or whatever. And so like, oh, we all decided that the accepted standard is GIF. We're going to do a few examples in a second of other kind of pronunciation things. Mispronunciation. So if you're giving a speech or any kind of big presentation and you mispronounce a word, it's going to send a message that you didn't prepare well or that you're not very smart because you don't know how to say this certain word. So that's just really not a good impression you want to give off. So make sure you are very careful to pronounce words correctly and double check or use other words if you don't know how to pronounce it, as to make sure you don't get yourself caught in that hole where you might look not prepared or not smart. Here are a few examples of some words that get mispronounced quite a bit, or even if these words don't get mispronounced, and we can talk about some other examples from them. So looking at this word, I want you to decide, and you can either say it out loud or in your head, but how are you supposed to say this word? And then think about how someone might mispronounce it. So this is supposed to be said like jalapeno. So like that's a little, my page is responsive. What does that mean? And so it says jalapeno. So that's a N with a tilde over it. So it has that N-Y sound. I've heard people say jalapeno or jalapeno to be silly. In everyday conversation, I guess that's fine. But if you're giving a presentation and you say jalapeno, you're going to sound like an idiot. And so you need to make sure that you pronounce these words correctly, even if it's not a necessarily English word. You need to make sure you are trying your best to sound it out as best as you can. Next, I want y'all to think in your head about how you're supposed to say the name of this restaurant. And then think about how maybe you've heard about it or how you've heard it mispronounced. So it's pronounced Chipotle, but I've heard people say Chipotle or Chipotle. Something that my dad says all the time. He'll mix up the L and the T and he'll say Chipotle. And that can happen a lot because we get letters confused all the time. So I would recommend if that ever happens to you, like if there's a word maybe you just cannot get it right, you should use something called a phonetic spelling. So I'm going to type that really little right here. I don't know why it's not already in here. You don't need to type this in your notes unless you think it'd be very helpful for you specifically. So a phonetic spelling, phonetic, that's totally how you spell phonetic. Oh, oopsie. Spell check is amazing, you guys. Some of y'all should use it more. I'm going to make all those the same size. Boop. All right, so a phonetic spelling, it means that you're spelling out the word like the way that it sounds. So if I'm wanting to say Chipotle, I might say Chipotle. So that way, like if I keep wanting to say Chipotle, okay, that doesn't say pole, that doesn't say te, it says Chipotle. Okay, cool. So that makes more sense to me and I can understand it a little bit better. Phonetic spellings can be really helpful if you get words confused or letters confused sometimes, but they're very important to practice with because if you are giving a presentation, you've been practicing looking at this word, and then all of a sudden you're looking at like this word, that'd be very confusing. That's what happened to John Travolta in this funny example I'm going to show y'all. Actually, first I need to give y'all some context. So in this video, he's introducing a singer named Idina Menzel. I could see I'm typing, that'd be helpful. There we go. He's introducing a singer named Idina Menzel, and he totally knows who she is. Like, she was in like the first main cast of Wicked on Broadway. Y'all probably know her as the voice of Elsa from Frozen. And so she's very well known, and John Travolta definitely knows who she is. But he was introducing her to perform at this award show. And what happened was he was distracted before he went on stage. So he wasn't getting present oriented. He wasn't getting focused on his task at hand. He was distracted. And then he walks on stage, and either the card that got handed to him or the teleprompter had a phonetic spelling for some reason. And he wasn't expecting that. And so he's totally butchered her name. And I wish this video would load so I could show y'all. But while it waits, we'll go ahead and move forward. So just know that if you ever want to use a phonetic spelling of something, just make sure you practice with it before you go into the big presentation. For our next word, oh, is the video loading? No, the video's not doing. All right, so look at this word and think in your head about how you're supposed to say that. And then think about how we usually say it. So you're supposed to say espresso, but a lot of people say espresso. There's not an X in there though, so I don't know why we do that. And again, like of course, in everyday conversation, we're gonna say espresso because we're normal human beings. But if you are giving a speech or a presentation like to Starbucks or some big fancy coffee company and you keep saying espresso, you're not gonna come off as being as intelligent as you want to come off. So make sure you're very careful with words like that. Like even though in everyday jargon, like we mispronounce it a little bit, that's just us being kind of lazy, which we'll get into kind of in our next verbal element. Just make sure you're being careful to pronounce it the way you know it should be said. For this next word, I want you to think about how you think it's supposed to be said, and then what are some pronunciation errors we probably normally get. So this word is tricky. What I've heard most is acai. I've heard people also say acai. So I don't know because I've heard an even mix of both, but I'm pretty sure it's acai. But a lot of people see it and go, acai? I don't know. So the reason this word can be really tricky is because it's Portuguese. So it's a Brazilian berry. So it's not even an English word. And so the sounds are going to come out a little different English words normally would. And if you go into like a smoothie place, you're like, I want a smoothie with acai in it, they're gonna know what you mean. But again, if you're giving a presentation and you keep mispronouncing this word, you're not gonna sound very intelligent. So that's not very good. So make sure you're trying your best to pronounce words correctly, even if they're not English words. And then these last two, oops, my computer's doing something weird. Oh no, go back. And so these last two, they can kind of be articulation errors, which again, we're gonna get to in a second, but they can also be pronunciation errors if you just don't read it carefully enough. So look at this word and think about how you're supposed to say it and how there might be mistakes. So it's supposed to be said supposedly, but a lot of people might take the D out and say supposedly. And again, that'd be kind of an articulation and pronunciation error. I've heard some people will like flip the D around to make it a B and they'll say supposedly. But again, you gotta make sure you're pronouncing it correctly. Make sure you see that's the letter D, not a B. So you gotta say supposedly. And for this last one, it says Pacific, but a lot of people might say specific. So you should be careful and slow down. Make sure you realize, okay, there's not an S there. Make sure you're working hard to pronounce just this specific word. Is specific Pacific. This video is not working, so that's kind of frustrating. But y'all have it on your notes, so go ahead and watch that video on your notes. It's very funny. He's supposed to say Idina Menzel, and he says Adele Dazeem. Big yikes. And that's what happens if you don't practice your phonetic spelling. All right, so I just mentioned a second ago how for espresso and supposedly those can be pronunciation and articulation errors. So let's learn about what articulation means. Articulation is physically producing the sound needed to convey the word. It is the formation of clear and distinct sounds in speech. So articulation basically is just speaking clearly. So in this scene in Hercules, she asks him like what his name is. And he goes, and he kind of starts the beginning of several words, doesn't really complete them. So she's like, "Oh, are you always this articulate? Are you always this well spoken and clear and distinct in your speech?" So when someone says you need to articulate, or maybe you've heard someone say you need to enunciate, it means that maybe you mumble or you're not making your words sound nice and clear and separate from each other. Articulating is very important because maybe pronouncing words correctly, like, yeah, the accepted standard is right. You're saying Chipotle, but maybe you're going, I want to go to Chipotle. And like, oh, you kind of mumbled it and blurred it together. So you may be pronouncing it right, but not articulating very well. Some of the most common articulation errors occur when we're just blurring or blending two words together. So if instead of saying, oh, I don't know, then it's kind of like, which even I kind of just blurred it together saying, you say, oh, I don't know. You say, don't know, or even like a shrug, or, oh, I'm fixing to go to the store. And you say, finna. It's like, okay, those are things we would say in everyday conversation, but definitely not in a job interview or in a presentation or a speech. Very careful to articulate clearly. So those were our verbal elements of delivery. So they contribute to like the understanding of the words. So verbal elements of delivery, those are pronunciation and articulation. It's our ability to understand the words that you're saying. However, we also have nonverbal elements of delivery. And like we've talked about before in class, roughly 2/3 of your communication is made up of nonverbals. And if your nonverbals contradict what you're saying, people are more likely to believe your nonverbals. So it's very important to make sure that you are giving them a good amount of attention. So it really is not just what you're saying, but it's how you're saying it as well. And your nonverbals can really enhance your message and make your audience believe you more. So make sure that with all of your elements of delivery, verbal or nonverbal, they should be supporting your content. So whatever your content, whatever its purpose is, your delivery should be supplementing that. So if I'm telling a story that is really upbeat and positive, I should be using some energizing hand gestures. I should have a pleasant facial expression. I should use a more positive sounding tone. If I'm telling a story that's kind of sad or serious, then I would maybe use more purposeful hand gestures, but probably a little less like energized. I could use a more serious facial expression, a lower tone, not so like high up in pitch, but a little more just regular and relaxed. So just make sure your elements of delivery support your content. Now, I mentioned that we have verbal and nonverbal elements of delivery. So within nonverbal elements of delivery, there are two different subcategories. We're going to talk about the first one today and the second one tomorrow. So the first one is called vocalics. Vocalics are anything that contributes, to the creation or maintenance of sound in a person's voice. So with our verbal elements of delivery, like pronunciation and articulation, those were about like having us understand the words you're saying. But vocalics are about just like the sound itself, not necessarily the words, if that makes sense. If it doesn't quite make sense how those are different, like verbal elements versus nonverbal vocalics, you'll see in a second. So pronunciation and articulation are about helping us understand the word that you're saying, but vocalics kind of creates more like it's like the sound of those words. So our first vocalic is pretty obvious, and y'all know this one pretty well. It's volume. So it's how loud or soft a person's voice is when the person speaks. And notice it doesn't say loud or quiet because someone can be speaking like audibly where it's like, oh yeah, I can hear you, but your voice is really, really soft. Some of y'all have this issue. We're doing roll call and you're like, oh, my favorite color is orange. And it's like, I can't hear what you're saying. So it's really important to make sure that you project and so that everyone can hear you because speaking at an inappropriate volume can really hurt your credibility as a speaker. If someone's in your audience and they can't hear what you're trying to say, it can be really frustrating to them trying to understand you. It can seem like you're not confident or like you're trying to hide something. And so you want to make sure that you speak at a volume that is appropriate. Not too loud, of course, and please don't yell, but it's better to lean on the side of being too loud because a lot of y'all probably aren't gonna get to that point where you actually are too loud. Our second type of nonverbal vocalic is tone. Tone is a syllabic emphasis on a sound that expresses emotion or meaning. Tone is a vocalic that should express emotion. Emotion is very, very important, and we all express it. If you don't have emotion shown in your voice when you're saying something, it is very odd. It's like if you're saying, like, maybe talking about like a happy memory you have, and you're like, that was the best day of my entire life. That is very confusing and very off putting that you're not showing any kind of emotion. So, inappropriate tone can harm your credibility, and lack of tone change can harm your credibility. So, if you're telling a story and it starts out really upbeat, and maybe in the middle it has kind of like a serious and sad part, and then ends really positively, but your tone of voice is just like really like, up here and positive the whole time, that's gonna be very odd because you had that serious part in the middle. You needed to take your tone down some and make it a little more serious. So, a lack of tone change is very, very important. I had a student last year and he told a story about like, I think like he had a rabbit that died or something, and he was talking about it as if it was like the best day of his life. And I was like, "Are you like joking? Like, did you hate that rabbit?" He's like, "No, I love that rabbit. I was so sad." And I'm like, "Then why are you like smiling and laughing? Like, it was so odd." Um, so tone does not always have to be upbeat and positive, but like when your content is, your tone should be as well. So like, remember, your elements of delivery need to support your content. Um, Best thing to do for tone is to practice out loud. Practice with somebody else because sometimes like I'll like, oh yeah, I think my tone sounds this way, but y'all probably know your tone does not always sound the same to everybody else. Like someday y'all will get married and y'all have the same tone of voice argument that you and your parents probably have now. Your parents have probably said at some point to you, like, I don't like your tone. And you're like, I didn't have a tone. Ugh. Well, guess what, guys? That argument still happens when you get married. Your tone of voice does not always sound the same in your head versus out loud. People will interpret it differently. So make sure that you practice out loud. Ask somebody, hey, I'm trying to sound like this. Is that what I sound like? Or even just read them your presentation and be like, hey, where can I add more emotion in? Just ask for input. It's always a good thing. And then identify places in your notes or in your speech where you can intentionally add in places to change your tone. Because if you're just reading something on the fly and you're trying to add in tone changes, that's really difficult. So delivery is something that we have to practice, and also purposefully plan. And so that's what we're going to do here in just a little bit with an activity. Our next nonverbal element of delivery that is a vocalic is rate. Now, y'all know rate, it's the pace or the speed of your speech. Actually, I want to go back to one last thing. For tone, tone and pitch are not necessarily the same thing. So pitch, like oh, think of like a high pitched sound. It's like oh, really high, kind of like hurts your ears. It's very shrill. Something low in pitch might be something like a very deep sounding voice. Neither of those things have anything to do with showing emotion, though. Like I can have a high pitched voice and sound like really serious and sad still, or I can have a very deep voice and still sound like very excited and like passionate and energized. So make sure you don't confuse pitch and tone. Pitch is like how high or low your voice is, but then tone is emotion. So make sure you don't get those confused. So like if you have a deeper voice, this is not an out for you. Like everyone can show emotion. All right, now we're talking about rate. Your own rate feels different to you, especially when you're nervous. People tend to speak a little quicker if they're really nervous or if they're really passionate about something. So sometimes I just talk really fast because I have a lot of energy and that's just who I am as a person. But if you're giving a presentation though and you're speaking super, super quick, it's going to come off that you're kind of nervous. You're trying to get the speech over with or that you're just reading off of your notes. And those are not good things to give off. But also, if you speak too slowly, we're all going to get really bored. And it's like, oh my gosh, okay, get with the program, speed up. And so it's really important to find a nice, normal pace that is organic, that maintains interest, but also doesn't go too quick. It doesn't lose your audience by going too slow. Best ways to practice, again, kind of like tone, like ask others to help you to blend an ear. Another thing that's also really helpful is to record yourself in a normal speaking situation. So you can try and identify what your natural rate of pace is. So like you could record yourself at the dinner table and just having a conversation with your family or your friends, and you can see, okay, when I'm naturally telling a story to my family and I'm not really nervous or anything, what is my go-to rate? Because when you're practicing your speech, you're going to be very, very slow and focused on going at a good rate. But when you get nervous, so you're going to go back to your natural rate. And so it's good to figure out in a normal speaking situation, what's the rate that I tend to go to? So that way you can know and be prepared for whenever you get nervous and, oh, okay, that's how I'm going to sound. So once you figure out what your normal kind of rate is, you need to figure out, excuse me, you figure out what your normal rate is, and then put cues in your speaking notes of, hey, slow down. Or maybe you want to purposely change up your rate. Because something else that's honestly good for all of these is that you can add like variations to all of these. So like if I'm telling a story, I want a good, decent volume the whole time. But if I'm telling a story and then like, oh, there's a loud noise, I'm not going to say, all of a sudden there's a loud noise. I might go, there's this loud noise. Or if I'm talking about, oh, we were like sneaking out of the house to go do something, then I might lower my volume. Oh, we were sneaking out of the house. Or like I'm telling you a secret or something. So depending on your content, you might change your volume. Or like I said already, you want to change your tone always. But same thing with your rate. Like if I'm talking about something being really, really boring, I might say, well, during the quarantine, I did this and I did that and I did this. And so it gives like, oh, a very monotonous pace. It's very slow to show, oh man, I was bored. Or if I'm trying to build suspense or I'm building up to some big important point, I might speed up a little bit to show like, oh, I'm energized. This is going to be a big important thing. So just like I said a second ago, like your content, your delivery should support your content, and that means that you might need to change up some of these as you go. So put those cues in your speaking notes as well for just having a good rate the whole time, and also any changes you might make to your rate. And then our last nonverbal element of delivery that is a vocalic is pausing. Something that I find that we as speakers tend to feel is we feel this responsibility to like speak the whole time that we are on the floor. And that's not necessarily true. Um, Sometimes it's what you're not saying that can be just as important. A good pause can draw someone's attention to something. It can serve a lot of really good purposes. So, good pauses are normal, necessary, and useful. If you have a lot of content and allow your audience to catch up, think about when we're doing lecture in class or during the media literacy projects when you're trying to type all those notes and everyone's going through the slides too fast. It's like, okay, you know, you need to pause so your audience can catch up with you. It can also allow you to catch your breath. We've talked about how important breathing is in this class. We talked about how breathing can release a relaxation response from your hypothalamus to make you feel less nervous. So breathing is important. And so when you pause, it gives you a chance to take a breath. It can also help you recognize and subdue an unruly audience. Y'all have probably gotten a look from your parents or a teacher, the I'll wait kind of look. So if you're giving a presentation and people in your audience are being talkative or rude, you can pause to give them a look and hopefully they'll get it together. You can also use a pause to emphasize something of importance. Our chapel speakers do this quite often. They'll say, all right, this is really important. I want y'all to get this. And then they'll pause and then they'll say their important point. Or they'll say their important point and then they'll pause. And so it's really neat because it kind of draws our attention in like, okay, there's silence right here. Why aren't they talking anymore? So it can be a really cool way to draw your audience back in. So pauses are really great, but just your pause has to be purposeful. So if you're pausing and you're not really sure like why you're doing it, maybe you don't need to pause there. It also needs to seem natural. So where you place a pause in your presentation in your sentence is really important. And then timing is crucial, both for again like where the pause is in the sentence and how long it is. So I'm pretty sure all the classes have watched this speech for Movie Monday, but that one High School Musical 3 speech where Troy is giving his little class elected speaker speech, and he says, "Oh man, this athlete can make a great creme brulee." And he pauses because it's at the end of a sentence, so that's good. And then Zeke kind of laughs, and they all laugh with him. And he says, "Or a brainiac can break it down on the dance floor." Then she stands up and does her little dance, and then everyone laughs. And so he pauses because it's the end of a sentence, and then she's doing her thing. But then he gets to Gabrielle and he goes, East has a place where one person, and I go 5-second pause, and goes, if it's the right person, another 5-second pause can change everything. And so, first of all, it's just too many pauses in one sentence. They're oddly placed, like in the middle of his sentence, and they're also kind of long. So be careful to practice your pauses so that they are purposefully done, that they are natural, and that they are timed well. Bad pauses are bad because they are not these things. They are not purposeful, they're not natural, they're not well timed. And like I mentioned earlier, some speakers are very, very uncomfortable using pauses in their speeches. And so instead of pausing, they will use a vocal filler. That is something called like a vocalized pause. Excuse me. Or say, so, or like. Now, I want to say the words like and so are not always vocal fillers. It depends on the context. So if I'm making a comparison and I say, oh, a sunny day is like a walk on the beach. You don't want to be like, vocal filler, idiot. Because some people get caught in that. And the word like and so are not always vocal fillers. Anything can be a vocal filler. I have students in my senior class who say, and stuff like that. That's their vocal filler. May have a tally mark going on their grading criteria, and they say, and stuff like that, about 6 or 7 times in a speech. So anything can be a vocal filler if you're using it to fill the perceived void of a silence where a pause should be. We use vocal fillers all the time in conversations. And that's because we don't plan out our conversations. I don't go to lunch and think, all right, here's what I'm going to say. I'm going to go to lunch. I'm going to talk to my friend. I'm going to ask how their day was. Based on their response, I'll ask them what made it good or bad. Then I'll tell them how my day went. You don't plan out your conversations. Even though we went over conversation skills last unit, we do not plan out our conversations that fully. So we use vocal fillers a lot more in conversations because they're not planned, and that's totally okay. But in presentations and speeches and job interviews, you should be pretty planned out. So you shouldn't have a ton of vocal fillers. So just if you ever are in a place in your speech or presentation where you maybe lose your place or you just need a second to think, it's okay to just pause. It's not like a bad thing, it's not a weird thing. It's much worse to just sit there and go, uh, uh. It's much worse to do that than to just pause and just sit there for a second. The silence is not as awful as you think it is. Like no one else is thinking about it as much as you are. So just pause, because pauses are great. Now, what we're going to do now, we are going to do an activity. So yeah, I'll go ahead and assign it today. So what we're going to do, we are going to choose a chapter from the book of Psalms. It can be any chapter you want, doesn't matter to me. You're going to copy it into the document, present the psalm that's on Google Classroom. You're going to mark it up with purposeful tone, volume, and rate changes and pauses. So basically all of the nonverbal vocalities we've discussed today. I mean, I think it should go without being said that you should be working on pronunciation to make sure you don't say, the living God. No, it's living God. So I should go without saying practice pronunciation and articulation, but we're going to focus more on the nonverbal vocalics today. So you're going to identify a chapter from the book of Psalms, copy the psalm into the document I'm going to assign on Google Classroom, mark it up with changes with tone, volume, rate, and add some pauses. Practice out loud several times. Then you're going to present it. I love you guys too. Bye. Record on your phone or on your computer, and then you're going to upload it to your school YouTube account. If you need help, watch this video. If you guys have not been able to view my YouTube videos, you won't be able to view this one. So I'm going to upload another video to, like the same video. I'm going to put it through ViewPure so y'all will be able to view it. So record your presentation, upload to school YouTube account, and then copy and paste the link into your same document where you had the purposeful changes, and then you're going to turn it in. This is going to be due by the end of the day, Monday. Yeah, end of the day, Monday. So I would say like don't wait until Monday to do it, but if just stuff comes up and you're busy, being quarantined, you can wait. So here's an example of just like 4 verses from a psalm that I identified. So I put in like little sections of words like, okay, so like I want to sound comforted when I read this sentence. Make sure you put those kind of cues at the beginning of the sentence, because if you put them at the end, you've already read that sentence, so you're not going to see it. And so those kind of cues need to go at the very beginning. I did a little bit of color coding. If you like to do color code stuff, you can do that. I made sure I put notes about kind of like the flow of my voice. So I put like, rhythm in here. I thought, for those little slashes, I don't know why I went out of full screen. But those slashes, that's where I'm wanting to put in a purposeful pause. And so if I was reading this, I might say, "How lovely is your dwelling place, O Lord of heaven's armies. I long, yes, I faint with longing to enter the courts of the Lord. With my whole being, body and soul, I will shout joyfully to the living God." Now I didn't practice that, so it would probably be a lot better if I'd practiced a few times, because I think all the tone basically sounded the same. But just even adding in that emphasis is really important. I think my identifiable emotion is like definitely a positive one. So that's pretty good. I added pauses. I did italics for emphasis. This word says joy, so that is the emotion that I should be expressing when I say that word. And that's just what you're gonna do. I would challenge y'all to find a psalm where David is just like going through it. Excuse me. So like think on your own, like just about David's life. Like, what are some of the good things he's gone through? What are some of the bad things he's gone through? Like, best parts of David's life, he was chosen out of all of his brothers. He was the weakest, but he got chosen to be king. He lived a great life, had a lot of victories, took down Goliath. That's neat. But then he had a lot of downfalls too. Bathsheba stuff, killing her husband. There's a guy at my window. Hello, guy at my window. Um, Saul trying to kill him. Big yikes. And so in a lot of the Psalms, David is like, "Oh man, God, why have you forsaken me? I am in agony. My life sucks. Where you at?" But then he's like, "But God, you still got me. You're number one. I love you." And so like the book of Psalms is really good for us to practice these vocalic changes, because there is so much change going on within this whole book. So that's why I chose and why I think it's gonna be really good for us to do. So this is the document. If I could find my mouse, there it is. My husband has a leaf board, so sorry if that's kind of loud. But here's the document that we're going to be using. Same instructions. Just choose a chapter from the Book of Psalms. Some of the chapters are really long, and so you don't have to pick one that has like 100 verses. Like, keep it brief. But please do include the whole chapter. So like on my slides, I only have the 1 through 4. I want y'all to do the whole chapter. You're gonna copy it here, mark it up with the purposeful tone, volume, rate changes, and pauses, just like I have over here on mine. Whichever way works best for you to remember how you're going to say the things. Anything's fine. You are being graded on this. So like if you don't change your tone, if you don't have an identifiable emotion, if you have like decent volume but don't fluctuate it, if you have like a weird rate or don't fluctuate it, if you don't include any purposeful pauses, like you're not going to get a good grade. So you have to put effort into these. Then you're record your presentation, upload it to your YouTube account. And again, I'll put that video on Google Classroom in a way you can view. And then you're just going to put the link in this document. And that's it. If you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, get to work and have a great day.